You're listening to the Hire Calling Podcast, your source for all things hiring, staffing, and recruiting. I'm Pete Newsome, and my guest today is Diane Prince. Diane, how are you today?
Hey, Pete. I'm great. Glad to be here. This is my highlight of the day, so I was excited about
I'll
being
take
on the
it. I'll take what I can get. Highlight of the day is good enough. Diane,
podcast.
you are a coach today. You have a long history in staffing. We'll talk about that. But you spend your time today coaching owners of recruiting and staffing companies, helping recruiting firms get into staffing if they're not already. Tell us a little bit just to kick things off about how you spend your days today.
Yeah, so thanks for the question. So I have some clients who I call my executive coaching level clients, and that's very customized, different things that founders go through. Sometimes it's issues with their business partners or co-founders, growing biz dev, managing their executive teams, things like that. So that's part of my day. And then I also have a group program where I basically want to help agency owners and anyone who wants to start an agency with all, because I have a lot of varied experience. So I want to help them with all aspects of it. And one thing in particular that I'm really passionate about is building an asset in your business. So as you mentioned, one of the things I work on is helping people to understand how to add temp staffing as an offering so that they have recurring revenue.
So the highlight of this conversation is, in many respects, is that you have grown and sold staffing companies. That one for at least $50 million, and that I'm sorry, you grew the company to $50 million, sold it for 28. I know that's public, so hopefully you don't mind me sharing that. Congratulations on that.
Thank
That
you.
is commendable, and something that many recruiting and staffing companies owners who I know aspire to achieve. So we'll see what kind of secrets we can get out of you today on that, if you're willing to share.
Absolutely.
Well, let's go backwards to go forwards. How did you get started in staffing? How'd you get into this crazy world in the first place?
Yeah. What I temped a lot. I temped through college and grad school. My first experience was when I was in college, I used to get student work permits and go work abroad. And when I was 19, I was pouring beer at the Glassblower pub in Soho in London, which I wasn't
Very
even legal
nice.
drinking age in the States. I was obviously super clueless. And the one and only night that I worked there, I was asked how fast I type. And then that's how I got into staffing. And on my first assignment, I overheard the office manager tell another employee, remind me to never to hire a temp again. So
Okay.
so
Okay.
and then I temped through college and grad school, so I was familiar, but really got started because I started with the vision, and I think it's really important for anyone going into entrepreneurship to know what they want to get out of it. And so it was really my then husband and I, we were in our mid 20s. We wanted to see if we could start a business that we could build and exit and retire in our 30s. So it didn't start with, hey, I have a recruiting experience, let's start a temp agency. It was, this is our goal. And then what are different businesses that could get us there so that we could achieve that goal? And then we
So you,
backed into it.
so you started with the end in mind, really,
Yes.
which is
Mhm.
rare, I think, from the staffing companies owners who I know. Had you worked as a recruiter prior to that, or not at all?
No, not at all. I had a master's degree in French literature, and I was
Okay.
working at a computer distributor as an assistant buyer. I mean, random. But we put together because so my dad has spent his entire career in title insurance, and
Okay.
then he got my husband a job in a title insurance company. So that was our niche. So we saw the need in that niche for contract workers, and that's where we started.
Okay, that's fascinating. That's really unique and rare. Good for you for seeing that. But I have to ask, which distributor did you work for? I worked for Tech Data Corporation for a number of years.
Okay, I was at Maricel. Did you ever hear of Maricel?
Maricel, yeah, I remember Maricel. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think Tech Data and Maricel back in those days, this was in the '90s, were kind of neck and neck, and I was also a buyer for a number of years. 3Com
Okay.
and Nortel Networks products is what I spent my days on back a
That's
long time ago.
awesome. Yeah, it was a while ago.
But those were fun days. Those were fun days in the '90s to be in that world.
Totally.
So okay, so you started the business. Easier said than done. High failure rate. What allowed you to succeed, do you think, when so many others fail?
Gosh, I mean, one thing I think not knowing anything was in some ways helpful, and not having, it was a lot of common sense. Not that I had a lot of common sense back then.
No
I
one,
think
no one who starts a business does, I don't think, right?
right? Maybe a little bit more now than in my 20s, hopefully. But I mean, grit, honestly, it was. And also not getting overwhelmed. Like one thing we did was just one step at a time, and just started, like just did it. There's so many people who have it's I'm sure it's not about the idea and having the idea. You have to have a good idea, but it's about the execution. And I mean, people would say to us, like, people would come and, pick up their paychecks and they'd be like, oh, great idea. I had this idea 3 years ago. And we're like, well, we're the ones sitting here
Right,
making bank. So.
right. But it's interesting. So over the years, people have said to me, because I started my company 18 years ago, I quit a job working for a Fortune 500 company, very common story. I was like, I'm going to go do this, put a stake in the ground. And I didn't know what I was doing. I had a whopping 9 months of staffing experience, 10 years
Uh-huh.
prior. I worked for Aerotech right out of college
Okay.
and was only there for 9 months and then was away from staffing for 10 years as I was in the
Mhm.
IT world. So you could argue pretty effectively that I didn't know what I was doing either. But I
Yeah.
had an idea. I knew enough about the industry and knew how to sell and believed I can get clients, but I didn't know if I could recruit. It had been a long time and the world had changed. I was recruiting pre-Monster, pre-internet, when I first started. People would historically come to me and say, I want to be an entrepreneur. I'd say, great, what's your idea? And they'd say, I don't know. I just know I don't want to work for someone else. You
Uh-huh.
actually did that because my advice over the years has been people will come up with an idea first, right? You have to know how you're going to make money and you have to be good at something. You took a very different approach, which I find fascinating.
Yeah, yeah, because I think, people who have ideas, because I'm sure, you hear it all the time. I have this business idea, or will you do this business with me? And the thing is, it's really it's about, because entrepreneurship is such, it changes your whole life and the way that you live. So you have to want to have that, you have to understand, well, not that you can understand it until you're there, but you really have to have that drive, because otherwise what I find is that you can start a business, and I have clients who come to me who have successful businesses, but they don't like them because they've built a business not around how they want to live. So that's why I think it is so important to have that drive and know you want to be an entrepreneur, even more so than the idea, because otherwise you can be led by an idea and then you're solving problems for the world and other people, but you're not solving your own problems.
Well, I believe most entrepreneurs fall into the category that I did, which is someone who is a tactician, for lack of a better way to put it. There's a book called The E Myth. I don't know if you've ever read that book, and
Yes.
I think that's a phrase that comes from that book. It's been years since I've read it, where you're good at doing something. In my case, it was selling, and so I believe there's a better way to do it. I wanted to do business in a personal way. I was tired of working for Fortune 500 companies that were constantly telling me what I couldn't do and contracts, that I couldn't change. I just wanted to operate with efficiency and fluidity. And the only way I was going to do that was start my own business. But I suspect that most people don't really know what they're getting into when they start a business. I certainly didn't. I thought I'd
Mhm.
have more freedom. I think I have
Mhm.
less than
Yeah.
I did working for another company. What
Mhm.
what was different coming in than what you expected?
I'm not even sure how to answer that question, because I think I just like, we started working on it pretty quickly after we had that idea in mind. So I don't even know if I had expectations. Back then, I tend to be a pretty spontaneous person.
Okay.
Especially, I've worked on that. Like, I have a lot of tools now that I employ to not be. I have very high level of risk tolerance. So I would say for me, it wasn't, I don't know if I really had, and I can't even remember if I did, like, had specific expectations, but I mean, it was like nothing like it's like having a baby, which, you just don't know if you're
There's
like
no rules.
a
Right.
parent. You can't explain to someone what it's going to be like before, you just have to experience it, no matter what words you try. And it's the same thing with entrepreneurship. You just don't really know until you're doing it.
So I'm curious. I started on my own. I was by myself, didn't have a peer. I missed that. I didn't have a manager. I missed that too by
Mhm.
not having anyone else to turn around and ask a question of. It was just, yeah, the buck really does stop with you. But you had a partner. Do you think that allowed you think that was helpful at the beginning? I don't know any different. You don't either, because you started with a partner. But
Mhm.
when you look at the benefits and potential, negatives of that, what's your take on starting with a partner?
Yeah. Yeah, because then I was a solo founder with my clothing business that I
Okay.
mentioned before the
Okay.
podcast. And it's way different. I mean, okay, so having good partners is amazing. And what the thing that makes, from my experience in different partners, the thing that makes a partnership successful is that each person has a really their own personal mission and
Yep.
something that they know that they want to get out of the business, and that sticks people together. Because I mean, there were times when people would have left, but having that, like having everybody's individual drive, and that again goes back to the vision, not just like, oh, that's a good idea, let me do it with you. Because then I did try to F a co-founder with my clothing business. It was more like looking for something to do,
Right.
and it didn't work. I think that having good partnerships, a co-founders, is fantastic, but having the wrong one is disastrous. That's part of why I started coaching, is because I saw what it was like to be a solo founder. And so a lot of my clients are solo founders. Some I work with teams, executive teams, but having that person, having a sounding board, because that's what I had when I had partners. And then when I was a solo founder, I realized I was driving my employees crazy because I'm
Right.
like bouncing ideas off of them, and then all of a sudden they're implementing them, and I'm like, what do you mean? Like I was just
Right.
talking, you know?
Right. Right.
So yeah, it is a big difference, but you don't want to have the wrong partner, because that can just that's terrible.
I found it surprisingly lonely. For years, I
Mhm.
thought that, and I craved to have a peer, some or a manager even, which sounds crazy in a way for people who haven't been in that position. I've had this conversation with so many over the years. They're like, "What do you mean you wish you had a manager?" I wish I had someone to be that sounding board, as you mentioned, and it's not the same with employees. I found because everyone's motivations are genuine, right? But they all have a different perspective and angle that they come from, whether it's conscious or not. Where if you have a co-founder, you're really in it with someone else who has the same end game in mind in your case that you did. And I find that just fascinating, because so many decisions I've made over the years, I look back on and think, if I had someone else to tell me, no, that's a bad idea, I probably would have ended up in a very different place, a better place. Maybe not, but
Mhm.
it's easy to look at the bad decisions and think, I wish I had avoided those. I've made a few good ones along the way too. I think a partner is potentially very valuable to a founder. So early success, that's hard to come by. Was there a point ever when you started where you said, this isn't going to work? I mean, did you come out of the gate, fast? How did the early years go?
Yeah, I mean, we came out of the gate fast. We actually thought the client that we thought was going to be our, like, we're like, if we just have them, it was Chicago Title. That's where my dad worked. Where we met with HR, before we were like, yes, but they took a long time to even use us. But then got our first client really quickly. It was, so back then, you mentioned before Monster, like beginnings of emails. So I had an ad in the LA Times, and it was, 3-line ad, because they were only
Right.
$120. And I put out an ad for a title assistant, and it was near my work. And so I go on my lunch break, and I got a resume. The first resume I got, I cried. I couldn't believe someone sent me a resume. This is
There you go.
great. I quit my job the next day.
Good
That's
to
how,
know.
that's
Okay.
how impulsive. Impulsive was the word I was looking for before. And then I got my first client. Our first client, well, that was a huge client, was Fidelity National Title. I just started doing reference checks. So I
Okay.
started asking everybody for references, and then I just called, and I didn't have a job for her, but I just, her name was Karen Saul, and I said, I'm calling to, ask you some questions about Karen Saul, and he's like, I'm like, and we were called Title Temps at first. I'm like, this is Diane from Title Temps, and he was like, from what? And then I'm like, oh, you don't know about us? And then, we literally had no business at the
Yeah,
time.
nobody knows about us, right? But you're
I'm
going
like,
to.
we sent someone over to come talk to you. And then I'm like, and then we were 26, 27. My husband grabs his briefcase and he goes down to Orange County, which is like a 2-hour drive. And we got our first client.
So reference checks, have to ask you about that. I
Yeah.
was taught the same way. That was 101 when I started with Aerotech in 1993.
Hmm.
check references, and we still check references on everyone today. It's something that I believe in strongly as a recruiter. I think that's my job. I'm surprised that it doesn't happen very frequently today. Have you seen that as well?
Yeah. I mean, surprised in one way. And I mean, even like with my clients, like that's one thing too. Like I'm always asking for references for vendors and like anybody. I mean, you learn so much. Yeah. And so I just make it my policy. Anyone I'm going to work with, I need to get references. That also gives me a bit of cooling off period, and if I get excited about hiring or working with someone.
Sure.
But yeah, and then also just as far as for biz dev, I mean, and
Well,
connecting the dots,
absolutely.
it's like, that's gold.
Yeah, and I tell my team today that if I started from scratch and didn't have any network at all, if you dropped me in a strange city, I would start just speaking with candidates and asking them
Mhm.
who they worked for, who they reported to, what was going on at their previous jobs, and references would be the default way I would develop business. It seems to be a bit of a lost art. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's also what I've noticed, not just the references, but I think it's because, well, there's so much information out there today, right? Like when I started, we bought a book called, remember those dummies books, the black
Oh
and
yeah,
blue.
of
It was
course.
it was how to start a temp agency for dummies.
That,
That was
that
our
existed,
that was, yeah.
right?
Yes, I wish I had it. I've been trying to Google it to find it, but that was literally how we started. That was the information that was available, right? And we like took someone to dinner who worked at like Apple One or something like that. But other than that, but now, so when people come to me and are in my program, or they'll ask me like, how do I do biz dev? And I think people, for some reason, people instinctually go to cold outreach, or they feel like there's something that other people are doing that they don't know. And most of the people, look at their LinkedIn and I'm like, I guarantee you have enough warm leads to build a $50 million business. Now I do cold outreach. I like cold outreach. I like having it going on in the background. Don't get me wrong. Cold outreach is great. But for some reason, people just kind of, I don't know what it is. It's almost like they doubt themselves, or they doubt their network, or they doubt and but yeah, I don't know, because that's our business is people driven, and we all say we build relationships, right? Like who doesn't
Right.
say that? And that's all it is. And it's so easy it's not easy, but if you pick up the phone and you talk to candidates, you're gonna get business.
I think there's a because I've this has been a conversation I've had many times over the years internally, and I think that there's a fear of being rejected, a fear of
Mhm.
asking for business and not feeling worthy of asking for it. If you're speaking with someone who's senior, a lot of recruiters are young. And when I started, I was 23, 22, even maybe. And I remember one of my first candidates wanted to come by the office, and the guy was older than my dad, and I was terrified because I felt like a fraud. I thought, who am I, this 22-year-old kid, talking to this guy who's in his 50s about his salary and very intimate details? And I
Yeah.
had to get over that. And to sell, which I've done throughout my career, you have to have a certain level of confidence. And I find that that's hard to come by, right? The talking to candidates is one thing. Recruiters feel like they're providing a service for them,
Hmm.
but that doesn't translate when it comes to speaking with prospective clients. It almost feels like you're not qualified to ask for to do business with them, where I find that so interesting because people, of course, we should ask. We're in the staffing business. They're in the hiring business. We should be asking them how they hire.
Here's a tip that, because I agree with you. And some people I think are more natural biz dev people, and some people are more natural recruiters. Like I'm not as detail oriented. I'm much more natural in biz dev than I am at recruiting. But I also like did an imposter syndrome test, and it was like, congratulations, you're one of the 5% that doesn't have imposter syndrome for what.
Okay, that's good. That's important.
But one thing that I tell people is, when just remember, especially for entrepreneurs and agency owners, to hype yourself up before calls, and just like remember, they're just people in jobs. Like
That's
these
for
are
sure.
people, especially entrepreneurs. I'm like, you're doing cool shit. Like you're building a business. You're doing this for your family. Like you're an entrepreneur. this person's, they're not, not to like downplay them or anything, but like they're just people in jobs,
Right.
and it's not. So there's, and also just like put yourself in a place of like, this is what they need me to be right now. They don't need me, like this client, this person I'm going to call, they need me to be the person that's going to tell them how I'm going to solve their problem and fill their roles. This is what they need from me right now. They don't
Right.
need, like, nobody needs me to be this, like, be anxious. And so it's kind of like, you, not saying that you won't have that fear or those feelings, but those are some things that I find that help to get past that.
Well, and you have to walk through the fire to some degree. I was so awkward. I had an out of body experience every time I would stand up in front of a room for years when I was young until I didn't anymore. And then one day it just clicks and you do realize you're worthy. You do realize you're not an imposter by doing it. But I don't know. And I've never figured out how to train someone to be comfortable with that unless they're willing to put in the reps and to do it and to be awkward and to be uncomfortable and to say stupid things. And then you realize, well, I'm not going to say that again. There's a
Mhm.
better way to say it. I find that the most limiting thing in the staffing industry. So I want to talk about that for a minute as to why you think most companies are stunted in their growth. You figured out how to break past the ceiling that's very common of being around 20 million in revenue,
Mhm.
founder driven companies that just can't scale. Why? What do you think the limiter is? I have my own thoughts on it, but we agreed to talk about this on air. So
Okay. So one thing that I think is the lack of client diversity and having an anchor client strategy, because a lot of agencies will rely on a couple of big clients, and it's really important to have that diversification. And then there's the mindset part as well, and thinking that you just if we have these ideas in our head, like, this is the size I'm going to be, we that's generally the size that we become. So it's knowing, like, I think that, like, people message me all the time and they're like, I had no idea I could build an 8-figure agency until I saw your post on LinkedIn. And
okay,
it's like, people build 9-figure agency, like people who started, when I started, there's people who are still doing it who are billionaires. They didn't sell
sure.
out. That was their path. I think just knowing that that's even an option I think those are two of the reasons I think that people get.
Okay.
What do you think?
So we talked briefly about the E Myth book, and I think a lot of it comes down to that, where the person who starts a business has a certain level of confidence and ability to recruit, to sell. They may have a history in the industry, enough clients where they feel like they can, hang a shingle and pay their bills. But tactician, they're the one who's doing the job. They are in the business. They're not running a business. So in hindsight, if I went back 18 years, I would do things very differently than I have. I would have pulled myself out of that role much sooner. I'm not a good manager. I'm not an empathetic manager. I'm made to be an individual contributor. That's why I was able to start a business. And I was the only salesperson until I think we were probably about 10 million in revenue. I could sell. It was natural for me. It was what I was meant to do, but I wasn't meant to manage necessarily. And to be able to train other people, selling to me is natural. I can't tell you why I'm good at selling. I just am good at selling. And I've tried every possible way over the years to and train a sales force. And we have some great salespeople, but I think they're great independently of what we've taught or tried to do, because that's been our limiter. And when I talk to peers around the country through TechServe Alliance, I'm in a peer group there, other associations, it is a recurring theme where you can figure out recruiting, right? I mean, some companies do it better than others, but if there's some basic things that if you can get down and have the right system and you're efficient and have the right employees and take care of them, you can recruit. But to sell, to develop new business, that seems to be the limiter, is what I've seen of companies. So you hit a ceiling where I'm just using 20 million as a round number, that companies really just have trouble getting past because they can't develop a sales force. Do you
Mhm.
think that's is that a surprise for you to hear? Do you agree with
No,
that?
I hear what you're saying. I think there gets to be a point where, once you get to, now that you're saying it, and I have a client around that same revenue, and like what I observed is that sometimes you also get used to how you're doing things. So like you've built a company a certain way, you might have some key people on your team. Well, you definitely do at that point. You have some executives on your team. And then at some point sometimes the company starts running you. And if you're not continually driving to move the needle, it's like in a family, like family dynamics are very difficult to change. We all have like kind of our roles in our families, and
Sure.
it's really hard to be someone different and break out of it. And I think it's very similar when you build a business. People get patterns happen, culture builds, and sometimes it's difficult to innovate. So I think it's just always like what's important is always and in seeking help and getting like you're in a group, and I mean and that's hire me to kind of help them to see things in a different way. And I think that's something that also, what do you think about that? Like
I think
just
you're right. I think it's you don't know what you don't know. And when you don't have someone looking over your shoulder, the emperor not having any clothes, so to speak, right? Where I observed one of my clients over the years, I saw them grow from a relatively small organization to a very large one. And I had a front row view for that because I was able to staff many of their people. And it was like my baby for years. And they grew to a point, they started to have challenges within the organization after they hit a couple thousand people. And challenges that didn't exist when they had 100, 200 employees because it was a different kind of organization.
mhm,
And I would say out loud, the CEO needs to remove themselves from the equation because the person that had the foresight to start the business, who was a trailblazer, an innovator, I mean, just took a lot of excellence in what they did, is a different skill set than running a 2,000 person organization. Not that
mhm,
we've grown to that point, far from it, but the skill set that allowed me to quit my job. My wife was pregnant with our third child at the time, right? So
mhm.
I was like, I'm quitting and I'm going to do this because I'm tired of talking about it. There was a catalyst that caused me to do it. Not everyone will do that. I'm aware of that. You know that. But I did. And I survived and I figured it out. And I had the work ethic and I had this sales ability to get business. I figured out recruiting, right? Losing was not an option. I had all of whatever that is. Those are an entirely different set of skills than what allows someone to scale an organization and to manage a team. And so I think what I saw in others, I couldn't necessarily apply in my own situation. And
Mhm.
I see that if we knew what was wrong, we'd fix it. Right. So I think we just don't know what to do to fix it. I mean, right now, I'm pretty transparent with talking about successes and failures.
Mhm.
Our company has an incredible reputation. I don't believe there's anyone better at what we do. And I would think anyone's benefits by using us for recruiting and staffing, but we can't scale our sales organization the way we should. We keep hitting a ceiling. And if that formula exists, I'm unaware of it. So that's the question. Do you think that there's a formula you can apply? Do you think if you stepped in doing what you've done, because I think you have to experience something too, right? To know what it feels like. You have to
Mhm.
start a business to know what it's like to start a business. I can't describe hunger to someone who's never been hungry, right?
Yeah.
But you've had that success. Do you think you could step into any organization now and say, here's how you can fix your sales problems?
Yeah. And it's in it, yes, because I do that. And it is different. Like it's just the same thing when people ask me what the best way is to do biz dev. I believe it's personal. Like it's different for different organizations. So like what I've done with one client that I mentioned, like what he's done is phenomenal, and he actually stepped in now as chief revenue officer. Like he's like, I'm going to be interim head of sales, because sometimes you do have to dive in, and like he's doing things that are completely just moving the needle. But
Interesting.
what
Okay.
but I look at it instead of saying, and I always in business because it can get so overwhelming, or you can feel stuck, or that you can't do something. But I turn it into a question. So I would say, if I had a staffing agency and I was stuck at 20 million and couldn't get past that, how I would approach it is, I wonder how I'm going to get to 50 million.
Right.
And that's always like in business. Like when my clothing business was so complicated. I mean, we did had a multi-level marketing model, and I manufactured the clothing, and like, but every time that I stepped back and I said, like, I didn't try to figure it all out at once, because getting past 20 million, I mean, it's a big thing, right? And it's
Yep.
like, okay, I wonder what the next step is. I wonder, I wonder how I'm going to do that. And every time I've taken that approach, I've been able to, then the next step reveals itself.
Interesting. I love it.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
so that's what you do now, right? You step in, you go in. How long does it take typically for you to spend with a new organization to have a good sense of what their problems are, or more specifically, what they need to improve and change?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends. I'm really good at asking questions. It is like I had this one client who was telling me how to do biz dev. I said, that's not how this is going to work. so,
Okay.
so, we always look at like clues, like what has worked, like what has worked in the past. And then, I mean, 3 weeks later, she's slacking me. I am obsessed. Like everything you've told me to do is working. And it's just stuff that from asking her questions, really. So it's sort of like, it's like a diet. Any diet, if you follow a diet, it will work. Like it doesn't
Right.
matter what
Right.
you're
Right.
doing,
Right.
if it's Weight
Right.
Watchers or keto or whatever, but it's finding the one that you're going to do and stick to. And then also figuring out how consistency is, that grit. Like remember, sales is the lifeline of your business.
Yes.
And that's another thing too, because often sales is like gets put on the back burner when people get busy. But never forget that sales is your lifeline, because that's really common too, that businesses are growing, things are, you think things are good, but then all of a sudden you don't have a pipeline because you've taken your foot off the gas on sales.
Right, absolutely, and that it's easy to see how that can happen with a small company who doesn't hire in advance of or in anticipation of what's coming, and to keep your foot on the gas. Exactly what you said. I'm
Mhm.
curious, if you could assign a percentage to it, maybe sales and recruiting only, maybe there's a third component like operations or other. What would you say is typically the limiter? And my impression from my peer group is it's 90% sales is a limitation, and then 10% recruiting and anything else. What do you see in your consulting practice?
Yeah, that is so interesting because people do have different skills. But yeah, it is, most of the people that come to me have biz dev challenges. It
Yep.
is mostly challenges in biz dev. But I would also say, to your point about the e-myth, letting go, empowering other people. Now, I used to be a terrible manager, and most people are. I mean, most people aren't trained to manage. And so I really had to learn, like I had to get tools to help me. And that's one thing that I help you. A few people are, some people are like, I'm a great manager, I cannot recruit or do sales, and I love leading people. There's and understanding too, everybody's different.
Sure.
Everybody's completely different and has different skill sets. I think that personality is rarer, and there's personalities that will build and scale and run a mature business, and they have that ability to with the company and adapt and change. I'm not one of those people. I build and then I like to get out. But yeah, I would say that biz dev is definitely a big part, a lion's share of the challenges.
There's tens of thousands of staffing companies. So this is a general question, of course, right? Because to your point, every situation is unique. But how frequently do you think it's the people versus the process? When you go in and look at someone, look at a new organization, a lot of people inherently don't like change. We know that, especially successful people or successful to some degree, right? Even change is hard as an employee. We know that. I
Mhm.
think owners who hire you are probably more willing to do whatever it takes,
Yeah.
or they wouldn't hire you in the first place, right? They know what they're
Mhm.
getting into. They want
Mhm.
and need your advice. But how frequently is it the people versus the process that's the problem?
It's often the people, and so sometimes people do hire me, and it takes them like a year to to want to be willing to change,
Okay.
which is pretty interesting.
So why
But
would they hire you in the first place if
because
they're not?
they know that changes need to be made. But so
Okay.
everybody's different. Like there's some people that like instantly they're like, okay, I'm doing this, and that this is working. But some things, I don't know, just everybody's different and hears things when they need to. But yeah, we're one thing that I see is common is having the wrong people who are mediocre performers,
Right.
and that sets a culture, and we're a service business, and our business is our people. Like that's how good we are is the people that we have. And that's it.
Yes.
And being another common thing is being afraid to fire people.
Mm.
Um, and it's, that's, and when we do that, and there's a couple of key roles that I help people to put into their businesses. So to answer your question too about processes, so that was a really key role for us, is once we hired an ops person. That was key, because he was super detailed, and that was a skill that we didn't have. So as
Okay.
people, but the people then also putting in the processes, and people have to follow the processes. And you also have to ask yourself, when it is the people, you have to ask yourself too, like, is it me? So there's like, if you have this from EOS, do they get it? Do they want it? And can they do it? And if
Right.
they don't get it, whose fault? Is it your fault or them? Are they motivated? You can't motivate someone more than they're motivated for themselves. Do they want it? Do they want the job? And do they have the capacity to do it? And again, is that you or them? Like, have you provided them with what they need? Or is it just somebody that just can't do the job?
Isn't it ultimately the owner's fault regardless, right? Fault for letting that persist, if nothing else.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always the owner's fault.
I'm
Everything
saying,
is.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, do you think you think you could avoid that, being in that scenario, by hiring better? Which is ironic that I'm asking that, right? We're in the staffing industry, and I tell companies, clients, prospects, look, we're going to do everything we can up front, but you don't know what someone's like till you live with them, right?
Mhm.
You can have all the panel interviews, you can stretch it out, you can have 10 rounds, whatever, right? But you're not really going to know. I think there's a certain level of assessment you can do on the front end. We know that. Do you think you can, is that something you get involved in, where you teach people how to hire better, hire for the right thing, so you're not having to fire someone quickly?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. With some of my clients, I even do one of the rounds of the interview, which
Okay.
is usually 15 minutes, because I have really specific questions. I ask them, and I'll find things out. Like, yeah, like, her goal is to, did you know that she just got an LLC for her trucking business yesterday, and that's what she
That's
wants to
right.
do? Like, that's, they're like, no, I didn't even know that. So, yeah, so I heard a long time ago that we're typically agency recruiters, like, we're typically bad at hiring for ourselves, because it's
Right.
different. Like, we're used to hiring people with, like, our product, and we're kind of like selling them, so we kind of sometimes look at the good in the person. But yeah, putting together systems really does help. But at the same time, like you said, you don't really know until you have them. But there's certain things, especially, I have some pretty strong opinions about, for agency recruiting, most people get wrong. Should I share a couple of them with you?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. If you're willing.
Okay. So, I mean, one is they have to. So, one thing I ask is, I'll ask them to rank a few words. This is for a recruiter who's on commission, for agency, right? Who's on commission, or part of their set base. It's usually like about half of their on target earnings is commission. So I always ask, like, rank these words in order, and one of the words is compensation. If they don't say compensation is number one, I want to know why. you
Right.
know so
Right.
like flexibility, work life balance, it's not going to be the role. Nothing is wrong with that, and I want them to answer honestly. And the only answer that I will accept, if I say, I noticed you didn't say compensation in your first two, because career growth is okay, I think, too, if compensation second. And if they say, well, that's because I know I'll earn a lot of commission and base salary is not that important, I'm like, that's the only acceptable answer, because it's very different. Agency recruiting is really different. And also, I think it's a mistake to only look at people with recruiting backgrounds. You
Right.
know, I mean, I think you came from tech. My partner came from title insurance. Like, and we hired recruiters who had worked in our niche. We did not hire recruiters for a
Okay.
long time. Like, we only hired people that had worked in the niche where we were placing people. I mean, look at, like, everybody trains differently. Most companies don't train well, and then we're hiring people that just because they have been recruiters. And I would rather hire somebody that has the sense of urgency and
Sure.
is motivated, and you can train them. And especially, and this might be an unpopular thing to say, but it's very different, people who are recruiting in-house than agency. And I do not hire, unless, so now agency people, I do help people from talent start their own businesses. That's different. But agency recruiters who are hiring people from talent or in-house recruiters because they need a job, it's a completely different skill set. It is mindset. It's not even that much, it's skill set, but the mindset is completely different.
Do you think that's unpopular? I don't think that. I don't think that's an unpopular opinion. I think it is a different mindset, right? The skill set, the on paper the job may be similar, but the motivation for doing it and the purpose and the reason and how you make money, I mean, that's all very different. So to me, it's an entirely different role, really. I mean, it has the same title. Again, you're going through the same motions, kind of, but why you're doing it is vastly different. And when you're internal, you have just a different set of considerations all day, every day,
Yeah.
and one's not better than the other. And I don't think I think the person that would thrive in staffing, an agency would not be happy in talent acquisition and vice versa.
Yeah, and some people will say on interviews when I ask what their career goal. That's why was my first question. What are your career goals? And some people say I want to eventually go into in-house recruiting. I'm like, well, then
Right.
this is the job for you. Like, this business is not going to be a stepping stone for you.
You're not going to be happy, right? Whether you could do it or not, and you have the skills, you're not going to enjoy it. You're not going to wake up every day having that sales mentality, which is just vastly different
And that's what
than
agencies need. That's what we need. Is we need the people that are they're going to wake up every day and want to kill it.
so hiring for recruiting is one thing. Hiring for sales, for biz dev, do you like this comes up a lot when I'm talking to my friends in the industry. How long do you let a salesperson go until you decide this person's not going to work out? Like, what's the time frame? How long do you let it go before you need to see results?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. I mean, I do like the 360 model. So I like it because so then, but I think so. Some people though, I think in the 360 model, if you have to recognize though that some people are going to be stronger at biz dev and others recruiters, and don't try to make them equal in both sides. I don't know. I think it depends. I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know if I have like a specific length of time. It's tough. I think hiring salespeople is one of the toughest things.
It is. It is. And that's where, as we talked about a few minutes ago, I think so many companies are looking for that answer and feel or at least feel that would be the solution to their problems. And I think they're right because of my own experience, where if I had a formula, I'm very confident that we can identify potential recruiters. We generally hire people who've never worked in recruiting. There's some exceptions, but first, second job out of school, sometimes first, but just the right mindset, as you described earlier. So we're very much on the same page there.
Well, you do have a biz dev formula though, because that's what I hear a lot is people think like that. But so what I believe is that you start out with you doing it yourself, right? You do this
Yep.
because you have to know, because a common mistake is people hire lead gen companies, they hire outside salespeople who just don't work.
It doesn't
That
work.
happens a lot. So I think it's really important to find out. And so if you're just starting out in your agency, or even now, like where you're at, you look back at clues and things that have worked. So if you're a new agency owner, you're starting out as maybe as a solopreneur, but you want to scale, then look at everything as treat every moment like you're training somebody else. Treat every call like, okay, I'm creating a sales process, and these are ways that you can sell. This is what's worked. Also, I was in between. I told you I've gotten out of staffing a few times, and I was kind of in the startup-y world, and I was head of sales for two different startups. And for one of them, what we did was, it was like content thought leadership. I knew nothing about the space. So I was in charge of selling and then building a sales team.
Okay.
So, and the founders were these two Harvard grads. They were absolutely brilliant. So what I did first, and you can do this in staffing. So I just listened. Like I brought people into calls. So I was basically a BDR, biz dev rep, and I'd bring people in, put them on a call with the founder. I was on the call. I listened, and I just furiously took notes and talking points. It's like, okay, she said this. And then the more calls that I was on, the more things that I heard her repeat. And I'm like, okay. And then finally I'm like, okay, I can do this now. So this is a way to kind of see, like, if you look back at clues, what's worked for you, then bring someone on who's like, okay, I'm going to be on calls with Pete, listen to what Pete says, Okay. If you have someone smart who's motivated and they keep on listening, they keep on hearing those talking points, so they get comfortable, because the more confident, the more that you know the product, the better you're going to sell. Have you read the Way of the Wolf by Jordan Belford?
I know. I mean, I know his story, but I haven't read his book.
You might like that. And he talks about that and how important product knowledge is. So I would have him on your calls, like listen, listen, listen,
Yeah, yeah, that's so true. I mean, I have thought of it and described it over the years as having arrows in your quiver, right? To draw from. I've seen every scenario dozens, if not hundreds of times. There's no question that's going to surprise me. And that's just me being in the role for a long time. But if you're new, you can get stumped easily. You don't know how to respond. You're thinking too much, if you will, versus just being in the moment. And it's very obvious, I think, to whoever you're talking to, if you're not really just listening and then really hearing and under comprehending what they're saying and then responding accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know of a way to teach that other than hands on, like you described. I think that's really, it's hard to do. It's time consuming to say the least. But
Yeah.
I think that is a secret, if you will, to success in training someone, is just let them see. I've been through that. It's been a couple of years, quite a few years, but with one rep in particular who we hired, and I just remember she would say repeat phrases that I said, but not really in the right context. And
Mm-hmm.
then she'd
Yeah.
see how they would be the response she would get, and she worked it out. And it took her
Mm.
months of being pretty awful, to be quite frank, and
Yeah.
until she wasn't anymore. Just like I was awful. And then once it clicked, it was just a beautiful thing to see. And she just grew so fast and
Did
had so
she?
much success. I wish she was still here. I mean, she has 6 kids now and has
Oh my
no
gosh.
time, no time for this business anymore.
Yeah. But
But it
yeah,
was
hire, I think, so it sounds like you had somebody then who had that tenacity to keep on doing it and practicing, and then the kind of the mental common sense to put things together. Because then also question, like I have scripts in my program, like asking questions, and if you approach it also like with a curiosity instead of
yes,
pitching, because when you go into a call that you're like knowing, thinking you're going to pitch, it typically doesn't work. You want to go in, this, like, you want to go in just understanding what their problem is, and then you can decide how you can solve their problem, and they have to see you as a solution
right.
to solving their problem.
Yeah, that's a thing that I think salespeople need to. If you're going to be a salesperson, you have to learn is that success comes from asking questions, not from talking and sharing your opinions on things. Yeah, I'm thinking back now to this rep's experience, and she was in sales for 3 or 4 months before she went out on maternity leave for the first time, and I don't think she'd closed anything in that time frame. And so, the whole time she was gone, I was thinking about the conversation I needed to have when she came back, and I said, "Hey, would you like to go back in recruiting for a little while?" Learn more. And she's like, absolutely not. I'm going to figure this out. That tenacity and
Mhm.
grit was in place, but you can't teach that, right?
No.
Most
Oh,
people,
wait.
most people give up way too early in sales.
Yeah. And what you said, because that goes back to the question that you asked, how long do you give somebody? And then, like, what you just said about what had that person's attitude, that says it all. Because if it's 90 days in and they haven't closed or brought calls, you also want to like have little successes, ways that they know. Like, it could be if you bring in, 10 contracts or whatever, like little things, or get calls, like little things that they can have success along the way that will help motivate them, so that they know that they feel some success. But also, 90 days in, 45 days in, whatever, hey, you're discussing this, they haven't had much action. You can tell if they're like, well, it's the market. No. But if they're like, is it them? Are they going to take it? Well, maybe I could try this. Maybe it's because I did this. Then I'd give them more of a chance. If it's somebody,
Absolutely.
but if they're blaming other external circumstances or whatever, they don't have a growth mindset.
No, not at all. All right, Diane, one more question, and I'm going to let you go.
Yeah.
Who should contact you? What kind of firm? What kind of help, if it's needed, should someone reach out to you, to solve for them? And who's your profile prospect?
Yeah, agency owners who are going through hurdles. Either I work with a lot of solo founders. I also work with some teams, and I am a sounding board. I provide a neutral third party. So it can be more mature agencies they want an executive coach. They realize they understand that there's probably value in talking about things and getting other ideas and opinions, helping to see their blind spots. And then also I work with brand new agency owners who are just starting out and help them. So I guess there's three things. So sometimes it's people from talent, it's other people who are starting out recruiting agencies, and then also some of the people in my program have had permanent placement businesses for years, even since the 80s,
Oh,
and now
wow.
they're looking at adding temporary staffing. So that's another group that I serve.
Wonderful. Well, we've spent enough time together over the past hour to know that whoever you work with is going to benefit. I feel very confident from that. It's just, when you've been in this business as long as I have, you just know when someone gets it and has the depth of knowledge, and you clearly have that to a very, very significant degree. So I really appreciate your time today. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, it's awesome talking. I've been enjoying talking to you on LinkedIn and commenting and stuff. So it's great to sit down and spend this time with you.
Awesome. Well, Diane Prince, thank you so much for today, and look forward to talking soon.
Bye, Pete.